this part, I want to talk about reflexes. A reflex is a rapid, pre-programmed, involuntary response of our muscle or gland to a stimulation. An example of a reflex occurs when you accidentally touch a hot burner on a stove. Instantly and automatically, you remove your hand from a stimulus, even before you are completely aware what you're doing. All of the reflexes have similar properties. First, a stimulus is required to initiate a reflex. Second, our response is rapid, involve a chain of only few neurons. We don't need many neurons to show the reflex. A response is pre-programmed, and all the times our response are the same. And the response is involuntary. We are not thinking about it, so no intent or awareness of the reflex before it happens. And a reflex is very important for our survival. It's a survival mechanism. It allows us to quickly respond to a stimulus that may determine to our well-being without having to wait for the brain to process all of this information. In this picture, you can see the reflex arc. The reflex arc is a neural pathway which is responsible for generating the response. In each reflex arc, we have different parts. The first part is called a stimulus. The stimulus can activate a sensory receptor. A sensory receptor responds to external and internal stimuli, such as temperature, pressure, tactile changes. Proprioceptors are sensory receptors which we have in our muscles and tendons, and I will show you in the next slides. So they can initiate a reflex as well. The next part of our reflex arc is this blue line. This blue line is called the sensory neuron. This sensory neuron can transmit the information to our central nervous system. In this picture, you can see the spinal cord as a central nervous system, and you see that this sensory information should pass the dorsal root ganglia first, and after that it makes the dorsal root and it can go to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. The information from the nerve signal is processed in the intention center by our interneuron. More complex reflexes may use more number of interneurons. And the simplest reflexes doesn't involve interneuron, or only we have one interneuron in between. And after that, we have the motor neuron, which can transmit a nerve signal from the central nervous system to our effector organ. A motor neuron transmits a nerve signal from CNS to peripheral effector organs. Sometimes our effector organs are gland, and sometimes we have muscle here. And the last part is our effector. The effector responds to the nerve signal from the motor neuron. An effector is a muscle or gland that shows the response to our nerve signal. The response is intended to contract or remove the original stimulation. So this is a reflex arc, and in all reflex arcs, we have all of these 5 parts. Our reflexes are classified in different ways. Some of our reflexes are spinal and some of them are cranial. It means that sometimes our spinal cord is the integration center and sometimes our brain is the integration center. Some of our reflexes are somatic and some of them are visceral. The meaning of somatic is this: our effector is a skeletal muscle, and sometimes it's visceral. It means that our effector is the cardiac muscle, a smooth muscle, or gland. Some of the reflexes are monosynaptic and some of the reflexes are polysynaptic. In monosynaptic reflex, we only have sensory and motor neuron, and between them we don't have any interneuron. But in polysynaptic reflexes, between the sensory and motor neuron, we may have interneurons, different number of interneurons. Some of our reflexes are ipsilateral. It means that the receptor and the effector are located in the same side of our body, right side or left side. And some of our reflexes are contralateral. It means that the receptor and the effector are on the opposite side of our body. Some of our reflexes are innate. We were born with them, and some of them are acquired. It means that they are developed during our life. So you can see the classification of spinal reflexes here. In this picture, you have the monosynaptic and the polysynaptic reflexes. In the monosynaptic reflex, like patellar reflex or knee-jerk reflex, you see that when we tap the patellar ligament, and I hope you remember what is the patellar ligament. The patellar ligament is the ligament which is located between our quadriceps femoris and the patella, and it can connect this muscle to the patella. When we tap the patellar ligament, the muscle spindle in the quadriceps femoris can detect this stimulation. We have the sensory neuron which bring this information to the dorsal horn of our spinal cord. You can see it by this blue line. And then you see that between this blue line and the red line which represent the motor neuron, you only have one synapse. We don't have any interneuron in between. And we call it monosynaptic. The information comes to our effector organ, which is the quadriceps femoris. This quadriceps femoris can do contraction, and we have knee-jerk reflex. In the other side, you can see the polysynaptic reflexes. In the polysynaptic reflexes, you see that the stimulation here is the heat. The thermoreceptors can receive the stimulation of heat in our skin, send their information by the sensory blue neuron to our dorsal horn, the spinal cord. Between the sensory, which is blue, and the motor, which is red, you can see the purple neuron. This purple neuron is interneuron. So we have more than one synapse here, and we call this type of reflex polysynaptic reflex. You see that this reflex can bring the command to our effector organ, which is our biceps muscle, biceps brachii. This muscle go to contraction, and you can take your hand off the candle. We have four common spinal reflexes: stretch, Golgi tendon, withdrawal, and cross-extensor reflex. And in this part, I will talk about all of them except the Golgi tendon reflex. The stretch and Golgi tendon reflexes rely on proprioceptors, and I will talk about these proprioceptors for you in the next slide. In human, the proprioception is provided by proprioceptors in skeletal striated muscles, which we call the muscle spindle, in the tendons, which we call them Golgi tendon organs, and the fibrous membrane in the joint capsule. Do you remember the fibrous membrane which cover our joint capsule from outside? You need to distinguish between these proprioception from extroception and introception. Extroception are the senses which we have from outside world, and introception are the senses which we have from inside of our body and internal organs. They are a little different. In this picture, you can see the muscle spindle. The muscle spindle is a fusiform structure which is laying between and parallel to our muscle fibers. And as you see here, they have these connection with the nerve fibers. They have neuromuscular junction, and they can receive the information which we have in our muscle if we have a contraction or relaxation or overstretching of our muscle. And the Golgi tendon organs are the organs which are located in the junction of our muscle and the tendon. We call them Golgi tendon organ, and they can protect our muscle from overexertion. One of the spinal reflexes is called a stretch reflex. I talked about a stretch reflex in the monosynaptic reflex for you, and now I want to talk about it in this picture. In this picture, you can see the patellar reflex. When you tap on the patellar ligament, the muscle spindle, which we have in quadriceps femoris, can detect this stimulation. It sends the information by the sensory neuron to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. And in the monosynaptic reflex, you can see number 3 is started here. Number 3, or this red line, can show the motor neuron which come back again to these quadriceps femoris. Quadriceps femoris go to contraction, and you can show the knee-jerk reflex. But at the same time, you see that we have the other processing here too, with number 5 here. Here, the yellow line is the sensory neuron. It makes a synapse with interneuron, and our interneuron can make the other decision. This other decision is this. This other decision inhibits the contraction of hamstring muscle here. So by inhibition of this contraction, our reflex become complete. This is the patellar reflex. And also the other type of stretch reflex is the triceps reflex, which you can see it here. This reflex starts from our triceps muscle. As you see here, the muscle spindle can detect any stimulation and any stretch here. They can send their information by the sensory nerve to our central nervous system, and then we have 2 different responses. One of them is monosynaptic response, which come back again to the quadriceps to the triceps muscle and help contraction of this muscle, and the other reflex, which is polysynaptic reflex, come to the biceps muscle, which is the antagonist muscle, and inhibit contraction of biceps muscle. This is the stretch reflexes, and you need to know that all the stretch reflexes are monosynaptic, they are somatic, they are spinal, and they are innate. These are the characteristics of stretch reflexes. The other reflexes, spinal reflexes, which we have is called withdrawal reflex, when we pull a body part away from a painful stimulus. The nociceptors or the pain receptors can receive the sense of pain, and then we can show the withdrawal reflex. I want to talk about withdrawal reflex on this picture. If you look at this picture, you see that this person steps on a sharp object here. The nociceptor can detect this pain. They can send the information, as you see by this blue line or sensory neuron, to the spinal cord. We have polysynaptic reflex here. You can see the interneuron in between, which can process the information, and the command come to our quadriceps muscle. As you see in this, it comes to hamstring muscle. I cannot see the name here. As you see in this picture, and we can show the flexion and withdrawal reflex. We can withdraw and pull them from that painful stimulus. But at the same time, the other reflexes happen here. You see that the other interneuron cross to the opposite side of the spinal cord, and it makes the other respond here. This response is going back to quadriceps femoris. On the other side of the body, this muscle can go to contraction and it can support the body weight. This second reflexes, which you can see here, is called contralateral reflex because the painful stimulation is in the right side of the person, but the left side, the left quadriceps femoris show the response. We call it contralateral. So the cross-extensor reflexes are contralateral reflex. They are somatic, spinal, and innate. But the withdrawal reflex is polysynaptic reflex, it's ipsilateral, it's somatic, spinal, and innate reflex. The next reflex here is called pupillary reflex. In the pupillary reflex, you can see that when you shine a light, the right eye only, you can see the response, which is contraction of pupil on both sides. But what happened here? This light is detected by the receptors when it moves by the sensory neuron to our brain. As you see here, it passes through the optic chiasm and go to the other side too. So you see that this information is divided into right and left side. They move to the right and left peritactile nuclei which we have in our brain, and the decision is contraction of the pupil, and this decision can move, as you see here, to the right and left eye. So you can see the result in both eyes. This reflex first is ipsilateral and contralateral because both sides can show the response. This reflex is cranial because in this reflex our brain can make decision, not the spinal cord. This reflex is called visceral because the muscles which can make our pupil are a smooth muscle. They are not a skeletal muscle. And this reflex is innate reflex. We were born by these reflexes. And we can do reflexes for our clinical testing. They are very useful sometimes. When we do reflexes, we can see the normal result, and sometimes our reflexes become hypoactive when the reflex diminish or absent. It may indicate damage to the spinal cord or muscle diseases or damage to the neuromuscular junction, and sometimes our reflexes are hyperactive. They are abnormally strong, and it may indicate the damages to our brain and our spinal cord. Thank you for listening to this video. Don't forget to check YouTube videos when you want to read about reflexes. Just you need to type the name of the reflexes in the YouTube search box, and you can see different videos for each of these reflexes.